Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Melly, Sky, Joel, Anna, and Ruth. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you are interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's fulfill some listener requests and relax with more from A Voyage to the South Sea, undertaken by command of His Majesty for the purpose of conveying the breadfruit tree to the West Indies in His Majesty's ship, the Bounty, commanded by Lieutenant William Bligh, including an account of the mutiny on board the said ship and the subsequent voyage of part of the crew in the ship's boat from Tafoa, one of the Friendly Islands, to Timor, a Dutch settlement in the East Indies, the whole illustrated with charts, etc., published by permission of the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, and printed in 1792 for George Nicol, bookseller to His Majesty, Pall Mall, London. Let's pick up right where we left off in Lieutenant Bligh's journals in February 1788. Let's begin. Monday, February 4th. Had very heavy rain, during which we nearly filled all our empty water casks. So much wet weather, with the closeness of the air, covered everything with mildew. The ship was aired below with fires, and frequently sprinkled with vinegar, and every little interval of dry weather was taken advantage of to open all the hatchways and clean the ship, and to have all the people's wet things washed and dried. With this weather and light unsteady winds, we advanced but 2 1/2 degrees in 12 days, at the end of which time we were relieved by the southeast trade wind, which we fell in with on the 6th at noon, in latitude 1 degree 21 minutes north, and longitude 20 degrees 42 minutes west. Thursday the 7th. The next afternoon we crossed the equinoctial line in longitude 22 degrees 50 minutes west. The weather became fine, and the southeast trade wind was fresh and steady, with which we kept a point free from the wind and got to the southward at a good rate. The weather continuing dry, we put some of our bread in casks properly prepared for its reception to preserve it from vermin. This experiment we afterwards found answered exceedingly well. Saturday the 16th. On the 16th at daylight we saw a sail to the southward. The next day we came up with her and found her to be the British Queen Simon Paul, Master, from London, bound to the Cape of Good Hope on the whale fishery. She sailed from Falmouth the 5th of December, 18 days before I left Spithead. By this ship I wrote to England. At sunset she was almost out of sight astern. Monday the 18th. In the course of this day's run, the variation changed from west to east. According to our observations, the true and magnetic meridians coincided in latitude 20 degrees 0 minutes south and longitude 31 degrees 15 minutes west. At noon we were in latitude 20 degrees 44 minutes south and longitude 31 degrees 23 minutes west. In our advances towards the south, the wind had gradually veered round to the east and was at this time at east-northeast. The weather after crossing the line had been fine and clear, but the air so sultry as to occasion great faintness, the quicksilver in the thermometer in the daytime standing at between 81 and 83 degrees, and one time at 85 degrees. In our passage through the northern tropic, the air was temperate, the sun having then high south declination, and the weather being generally fine, till we lost the northeast trade wind. But such a thick haze surrounded the horizon that no object could be seen except at a very small distance. The haze commonly cleared away at sunset and gathered again at sunrise. Between the northeast and southeast trade winds, the calms and rains, if of long continuance, are very liable to produce sickness unless great attention is paid to keeping the ship clean and wholesome by giving all the air possible, drying between decks with fires, and drying and airing the people's clothes and bedding. Besides these precautions, we frequently wetted with vinegar, and every evening the pumps were used as ventilators. With these endeavors to secure health, we passed the low latitudes without a single complaint. The currents we met with were by no means regular, nor have I ever found them so in the middle of the ocean. However, from the channel to the southward as far as Madeira, there is generally a current setting to the south-southeast. Thursday the 21st. On the evening of the 21st, a ship was seen in the northeast, but at too great a distance to distinguish of what country. Friday the 22nd. The next day the wind came round to the north and northwest, so that we could no longer consider ourselves in the trade wind. Our latitude at noon was 25 degrees 55 minutes south, longitude 36 degrees 29 minutes west, variation of the compass 3 degrees east. Saturday the 23rd. Towards night the wind died away, and we had some heavy showers of rain, of which we profited by saving a ton of good water. The next day we caught a shark and 5 dolphins. Tuesday the 26th. We bent new sails and made other necessary preparations for encountering the weather that was to be expected in a high latitude. Our latitude at noon was 29 degrees 38 minutes south, longitude 41 degrees 44 minutes west, variation 7 degrees 13 minutes east. In the afternoon, the wind being westerly and blowing strong in squalls, some butterflies and other insects, like what we call horseflies, were blown on board of us. No birds were seen except shearwaters. Our distance from the coast of Brazil at this time was above 100 leagues. March, Sunday the 2nd. In the forenoon, after seeing that every person was clean, divine service was performed according to my usual custom on this day. I gave to Mr. Fletcher Christian, whom I had before directed to take charge of the third watch, a written order to act as lieutenant. Saturday the 8th, we were at noon in latitude 36 degrees 50 minutes south and longitude 52 degrees 53 minutes west. The last 4 days, we several times tried for soundings without finding bottom, though considerably to the westward of Captain Wallace's track, who had soundings at 54 fathoms depth in latitude 35 degrees 40 minutes south and longitude 49 degrees 54 minutes west. This day we tried with 240 fathoms of line, but did not find bottom, at the same time observing a rippling in the water. We tried the current by mooring a keg with 100 fathoms of line, by which it appeared to run to the north-northwest at the rate of 1.5 miles per hour. By the noon observation, however, we were 18 miles to the southward of our reckoning. In the afternoon we saw a turtle floating, and not having much wind, hoisted a boat out and sent after it, but it was found to be in a putrid state, with a number of crabs feeding upon it. The change of temperature began now to be sensibly felt, there being a variation in the thermometer since yesterday of 8 degrees. That the people might not suffer by their own negligence, I gave orders for their light tropical clothing to be put by, and made them dress in a manner more suited to a cold climate. I had provided for this before I left England, by giving directions for such clothes to be purchased as were necessary. Monday the 10th. In the forenoon, we struck soundings at 83 fathoms depth. Our latitude 40 degrees 8 minutes south and longitude 55 degrees 40 minutes west. This I conclude to have been near the edge of the bank, for the wind being at south-southwest, we stood towards the southeast, and after running 14 miles in that direction, we could find no bottom with 160 fathoms of line. In the night we stood towards the west-southwest with a southerly wind and got again into soundings. The next day we saw a great number of whales of an immense size that had 2 spout holes on the back of the neck. Upon a complaint made to me by the master, I found it necessary to punish Matthew Quintal, one of the seamen, with 24 lashes for insolence and mutinous behavior. Before this, I had not had occasion to punish any person on board. Wednesday the 12th. On the 12th we caught a porpoise by striking it with the grains. Everyone ate heartily of it, and it was so well liked that no part was wasted. Friday the 14th. On the 14th in the afternoon, we saw a land bird like a lark, and passed part of a dead whale that had been left by some whalers after they had taken the blubber off. Saw likewise 2 strange sail. The next day at noon, our latitude was 43 degrees 6 minutes south, and longitude 58 degrees 42 minutes west. Had soundings at 75 fathoms, the bottom a fine greenish sand. Saw 2 hawks. Sunday the 16th. On the 16th, another ship was seen to the west-northwest, standing to the northward. Latitude at noon 43 degrees 34 minutes south. We continued running to the southward, keeping in soundings. Wednesday the 19th. On the 19th at noon, by my account, we were within 20 leagues of Port Desire, but the wind blowing fresh from the northwest with thick, foggy weather, I did not attempt to make the land. We passed a good deal of rockweed and saw many whales and albatrosses and other seabirds. Thursday, the 20th. On the 20th at noon, our latitude was 50 degrees 24 minutes south and longitude 65 degrees 50 minutes west. In the afternoon, the wind, which had for some time past been northerly, suddenly shifted to the west-southwest and blew hard. Sunday, the 23rd. We steered to the south-southeast, and on the 23rd at 2 o'clock in the morning, we discovered the coast of Tierra del Fuego bearing southeast. At 9 in the forenoon, we were off Cape San Diego, the eastern part of Tierra del Fuego. Observed the variation here to be 21 degrees 23 east. The wind being unfavorable, I thought it more advisable to go round to the eastward of Staten Land than to attempt passing through Straits Le Maire. The two opposite coasts of the straits exhibited very different appearances. The land of Tierra del Fuego hereabouts, though the interior parts are mountainous, yet near the coast is of a moderate height, and at the distance we were from it, had not an unpromising appearance. The coast of Staten Land near the straits is mountainous and craggy, and remarkable for its high-peaked hills. Straits Le Maire is a fair opening, which cannot well be mistaken, but if any doubt could remain, the different appearances of the opposite shores would sufficiently make the straits known. I did not sail within less than 6 leagues of the coast, that we might have the wind more regular, and avoid being exposed to the heavy squalls that came off from the land. At noon, Cape St. Anthony bore south, and the westernmost of New Year's Isles southeast 1/4 south, 5 or 6 leagues. Latitude observed 54 degrees 28 minutes south, longitude 64 degrees 4 minutes west. The sight of New Year's Harbor almost tempted me to put in, but the lateness of the season and the people being in good health determined me to lay aside all thoughts of refreshment until we should reach Otaheite. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the easternmost of New Year's Isles, where Captain Cook observed the latitude to be 55 degrees 40 minutes south, bore from us south 4 leagues. We saw the entrance isles of New Year's Harbor, at the back of which the land is very craggy and mountainous. This must be a very convenient port to touch at, as the access to it is safe and easy. The harbor lies south-southeast by compass from the northeast part of the easternmost of the New Year's Islands. About 2 leagues to the westward of Cape St. John, I observed the separation of the mountains that Captain Cook has taken notice of, which has the appearance of Staten Land being there divided into 2 islands. At sunset, Cape St. John bore south-southeast 5 or 6 leagues. The land hereabouts is of less height, and not so rugged as near New Year's Harbor. The night coming on, I could get no good view of the coast near the Cape, and at daylight next morning we were at too great a distance. Monday the 24th. We had stood to the southward all night with the wind at west-southwest and southwest. At 8 in the morning, Cape St. John bore northwest 10 leagues distant. Soon after, we lost sight of the land. From the result of my lunar observations, assisted by the timekeeper, I make the longitude of the west side of Straits Le Maire 64 degrees 48 minutes west, the easternmost of the New Year's Isles 63 degrees 52 minutes west, and the longitude of Cape St. John 63 degrees 19 minutes west. In our run from the latitude of 12 degrees south to 48 degrees south, the ship was set 2 degrees 30 minutes to the eastward by currents, and from the latitude of 48 degrees south to Staten Land, the currents set us to the westward 2 degrees 43 minutes, which I imagine to have been occasioned by an indraft into the Straits of Magellan. From the time we lost sight of the land to the end of the month, we were struggling with bad weather and contrary winds. Monday the 31st. But on the morning of the 31st, the wind came to the north-northeast and made us entertain great hopes that we should be able to accomplish our passage round the Cape without much difficulty. At noon we were in latitude 60 degrees 1 minute south and in 71 degrees 45 minutes west longitude, which is 8 degrees 26 minutes west of the meridian of Cape St. John. This flattering appearance was not of long continuance. In the night the wind became variable, and next day settled again in the west and northwest, with very bad weather. April, Wednesday the 2nd. On the 2nd in the morning, the wind, which had blown fresh all night from the northwest, came round to the southwest and increased to a heavy gale. At 6 in the morning, the storm exceeded what I had ever met with before, and the sea, from the frequent shifting of the wind, running in contrary directions, broke exceedingly high. Our ship, however, lay to very well under a main and forestaysail. The gale continued with severe squalls of hail and sleet the remainder of this and all the next day. Friday the 4th. On the 4th, the wind was less violent, but far from moderate. With so much bad weather, I found it necessary to keep a constant fire night and day, and one of the watch always attended to dry the people's wet clothes, and this, I have no doubt, contributed as much to their health as to their comfort. Our companions in this inhospitable region were albatrosses and 2 beautiful kinds of birds, the small blue petrel and pintada. A great many of these were frequently about the wake of the ship, which induced the people to float a line with hooks baited to endeavor to catch them, and their attempts were successful. Sunday the 6th. On the 6th the weather was moderate and continued so till the 9th, with the wind veering between the northwest and southwest, of which we were able to take advantage. Monday the 7th. On the 7th observed the variation 27 degrees 9 minutes east, our latitude 60 degrees 24 minutes south, and longitude 75 degrees 54 minutes west. Wednesday the 9th. On the 9th at noon, we were in latitude 59 degrees 31 minutes south, and our longitude 76 degrees 58 minutes west, which is farther to the west than we had yet been. The weather was now unfavorable again, blowing strong from the westward with a high sea. On the 10th we saw some fish which appeared spotted and about the size of bonitos. These were the only fish we had seen in this high latitude. Saturday the 12th. The stormy weather continued with a great sea. The ship now began to complain, and required to be pumped every hour, which was no more than we had reason to expect from such a continuance of gales of wind and high seas. The decks also became so leaky that it was obliged to allot the great cabin, of which I made little use except in fine weather, to those people who had wet berths to hang their hammocks in, and by this means the between decks was less crowded. Every morning, all the hammocks were taken down from where they hung, and when the weather was too bad to keep them upon deck, they were put in the cabin, so that the between decks were cleaned daily and aired with fires if the hatchways could not be opened. With all this bad weather, we had the additional mortification to find at the end of every day that we were losing ground, for notwithstanding our utmost exertions, and keeping on the most advantageous tacks, which if the weather had been at all moderate would have sufficiently answered our purpose, yet the greater part of the time we were doing little better than drifting before the wind. Sunday the 13th. Birds as usual were about the ship, and some of them caught, and for the first time since we left Staten Land we saw some whales. This morning, owing to the violent motion of the ship, the cook fell and broke one of his ribs, and another man by a fall dislocated his shoulder. The gunner who had the charge of a watch was laid up with the rheumatism, and this was the first sick list that appeared on board the ship. The time of full moon which was approaching made me entertain hopes that after that period we should experience some change of wind or weather in our favor, but the event did not at all answer our expectations. The latitude at noon this day was 58 degrees 9 minutes south, and longitude 76 degrees 1 minute west. As we caught a good many birds, but which were all lean and tasted fishy, we tried an experiment upon them which succeeded admirably. By keeping them cooped up and cramming them with ground corn, they improved wonderfully in a short time, so that the pintata birds became as fine as ducks, and the albatrosses were as fat and not inferior to taste to fine geese. Some of the latter birds were caught that measured 7 feet between the extremities of the wings when spread. This unexpected supply came very opportunely, for none of our livestock remained except hogs, the sheep and poultry not being hardy enough to stand the severity of the weather. Sunday the 20th. This morning the wind died away, and we had a calm for a few hours, which gave us hopes that the next would be a more favorable wind. Towards noon, to our great disappointment, the wind sprang up again from the westward, and in the afternoon blew strong with snow and hailstorms. Monday the 21st. This was the second day after the full moon, but as I have remarked before, it had no influence on the weather. At noon our latitude was 58 degrees 31 minutes south, and longitude 70 degrees 7 minutes west, which is near 7 degrees to the eastward of our situation on the morning of the 9th instant, when we had advanced the farthest in our power to the westward, being then in 76 degrees 58 minutes west, 3 degrees to the west of Cape Desiada, the west part of the Straits of Magellan, and at this time we were 3 degrees 52 minutes to the east of it, and hourly losing ground. It was with much concern I saw how hopeless and even unjustifiable it was to persist any longer in attempting a passage this way to the Society Islands. We had been 30 days in this tempestuous ocean. At one time we had advanced so far to the westward as to have a fair prospect of making our passage round, But from that period, hard gales of westerly wind had continued without intermission, a few hours excepted, which, to borrow an expression in Lord Anson's Voyage, were like the elements drawing breath to return upon us with redoubled violence. The season was now too far advanced for us to expect more favorable winds or weather, and we had sufficiently experienced the impossibility of beating round against the wind, or of advancing at all without the help of a fair wind, for which there was little reason to hope. Another consideration which had great weight with me was that, if I persisted in my attempt this way, and should after all fail to get round, it would occasion such a loss of time that our arrival at Otaheite, soon enough to return in the proper season by the East Indies, would be rendered precarious. On the other hand, the prevalence of the westerly winds in high southern latitudes left me no reason to doubt of making a quick passage to the Cape of Good Hope, and thence to the eastward round New Holland. Tuesday the 22nd. Having maturely considered all circumstances, I determined to bear away for the Cape of Good Hope, and at 5 o'clock on the evening of the 22nd, the wind then blowing strong at west, I ordered the helm to be put a-weather, to the great joy of every person on board. Our sick list at this time had increased to 8, mostly with rheumatic complaints. In other respects, the people were in good health, though exceedingly jaded. The passage round Cape Horn into the South Seas during the summer months has seldom been attended with difficulty, and is to be preferred in the moderate seasons to the more distant route to the eastward round the Cape of Good Hope and New Holland. If we had been 1 month earlier, or perhaps less, I doubt not but we should have effected our passage. The soundings that are met with off the coast of America, from the latitude of 36 degrees south to the southward, are very convenient to enable ships to judge of their distance from the land, as thick fogs are very frequent near the coast. If the winds are favorable, to go through Straits Le Maire must considerably shorten the passage round Cape Horn, as all the distance saved is so much gain to the westward. I am informed that several harbors have been lately discovered by the South Sea whalers on the north side of Staten Island that afford safe anchorage with supplies of wood and water. While we were off Cape Horn, I did not observe that our situation was at all affected by currents. Chapter 3. Passage towards the Cape of Good Hope and search after Tristan da Cunha. Arrival at False Bay. Occurrences there. Reports concerning the Grosvenor's people. Departure from the Cape. 1788. April, Friday the 25th. The westerly winds and stormy weather continuing gave me no reason to repent of my determination. On the 25th at noon, we were in latitude 54 degrees 16 minutes south and longitude 57 degrees 4 minutes west. The nearest of the Falkland Islands, by my reckoning, then bore north 13 degrees west, distance 23 leagues. Our stock of water being sufficient to serve us to the Cape of Good Hope, I did not think it worthwhile to stop at these islands, as the refreshment we might obtain there would scarce repay us for the expense of time. We therefore continued our course towards the northeast and east-northeast. May, Friday the 9th. On the 9th of May at 8 o'clock in the evening, we were near the situation of Tristan da Cunha, our latitude being 37 degrees 7 minutes south and longitude 15 degrees 26 minutes west. All the afternoon the weather had been clear enough for land of a moderate height to be seen at least 7 leagues. I therefore concluded that we had not yet passed the meridian of the island, for the most western position given to it from any authority is 15 degrees 0 minutes west. As I wished to make this island, we kept our wind on different tacks during the night, that we might be nearly in the same place at daylight in the morning as on the preceding evening. In the morning, no land being in sight, we continued to steer to the eastward. Saturday the 10th. We ran on all day, having clear weather, but without seeing anything to indicate our being near land. At noon, our latitude observed was 37 degrees 27 minutes south, which being more to the southward than we had reason to expect, I altered the course to the northward and steered northeast all the afternoon. At 6 o'clock in the evening, we were in latitude 37 degrees 0 minutes south and longitude 12 degrees 42 minutes west, having a clear horizon, but not the least sign of being in the neighborhood of land. With the night came thick, rainy weather, and we were now to the eastward of the situation ascribed to Tristan da Cunha. I therefore determined to give over the search and to resume our course towards the Cape of Good Hope. The island of Tristan da Cunha, by Robertson's Elements, is laid down in 37 degrees 12 minutes south latitude and 13 degrees 23 minutes west longitude. Thursday the 22nd. At 2 in the afternoon, we saw the Table Mountain of the Cape of Good Hope. As it is reckoned unsafe riding in Table Bay at this time of year, I steered for False Bay. The next evening we anchored in the outer part. Saturday the 24th. On the forenoon of the 24th, got the ship secured in Simon's Bay, which is in the inner part of False Bay. When moored, Noah's Ark bore south 35 degrees east 3/4 of a mile, and the hospital south 72 west. We found lying here one outward-bound Dutch Indiaman, 5 other Dutch ships, and a French ship. After saluting the fort, which was returned by an equal number of guns, I went on shore, and dispatches were sent away to Cape Town to acquaint the governor of our arrival. A Dutch ship at this time lying in Table Bay bound for Europe, I sent letters by her to the Admiralty. It is very unusual for ships to be in Table Bay so late in the year, on account of the strong northwest winds. April is the time limited. I gave the necessary directions for getting our wants supplied. The ship required to be caulked in every part, for she was become so leaky that we had been obliged to pump every hour in our passage from Cape Horn. This we immediately set about, as well as repairing our sails and rigging. The severe weather we had met with, and the leakiness of the ship, made it necessary to examine into the state of all the stores and provisions. Of the latter, a good deal was found damaged, particularly the bread. The timekeeper I took on shore to ascertain its rate, and other instruments to make the necessary astronomical observations. Fresh meat, with soft bread and plenty of vegetables, were issued daily to the ship's company the whole time we remained here. A few days after our arrival, I went over to Cape Town and waited on His Excellency Monsieur Vandegraff, the governor, who obligingly arranged matters so much to our advantage that we scarcely felt the inconvenience of being at a distance from the Cape Town, whence we received all our supplies. The Cape Town is considerably increased within the last 8 years. Its respectability with regard to strength has kept pace with its other enlargements and rendered it very secure against any attempt which is not made with considerable force. Great attention is paid to military order and discipline, and monthly signals are established to communicate with their shipping as they arrive near the coast, that they may not run unawares into the hands of an enemy. I found everything much dearer than when I was here in 1780. Sheep cost 4 Spanish dollars each, and were so small that it answered better to purchase the mutton for the ship's daily use at 4 pence per pound. During our stay here, I took care to procure seeds and plants that would be valuable at Otaheite and the different places we might touch at in our way thither. In this I was greatly assisted by Colonel Gordon, the commander of the troops. In company with this gentleman, the loss of the Grosvenor East Indiaman was mentioned. On this subject Colonel Gordon expressed great concern that from anything he had said, hopes were still entertained to flatter the affectionate wishes of the surviving friends of those unfortunate people. He said that in his travels into the country he had met with a native who described to him that there was a woman among his countrymen who had a child, and that she frequently embraced the child and cried most violently. This was all he, the colonel, could understand, and being then on his return home, with his health much impaired by fatigue, the only thing that he could do was to make a friend of the native by presents and promises of reward, on condition that he would take a letter to this woman and bring him back an answer. Accordingly, he wrote letters in English, French, and Dutch, desiring that some sign or mark might be returned, either by writing with a burnt stick or by any means she should be able to devise, to satisfy him that she was there, and that on receiving such token from her, every effort should be made to ensure her safety and escape. But the man, although apparently delighted with the commission which he had undertaken, never returned, nor has the colonel ever heard anything more of him, though he had been instructed in methods of conveying information through the country. To this account, that I may not again have occasion to introduce so melancholy a subject, I shall add the little information I received respecting it when I revisited the Cape in my return towards Europe. A reputable farmer of the name of Holhausen, who lives at Swellendam, 8 days' journey from the Cape, had information from some natives that at a kraal or village in their country there were white men and women. On this intelligence, Mr. Holhausen asked permission of the governor to make an expedition with some of the farmers into the country, requiring 1,000 rix dollars to bear his expenses. The governor referred him to Mr. Walk, the Landros of Graaf Reinet, a new colony in his way. But from the place where Mr. Holhausen lives to the Landros, Mr. Walk's residence is a month's journey, which he did not choose to undertake at an uncertainty, as Mr. Walk might have disapproved of the enterprise. It was in October last that Mr. Holhausen offered to go on this service. He was one of the party who went along the sea-coast in search of these unfortunate people, when a few of them first made their appearance at the Cape. I am, however, informed that the Dutch farmers are fond of making expeditions into the country, that they may have opportunities of taking away cattle, and this I apprehend to be one of the chief reasons why undertakings of this kind are not encouraged. On the 13th of June, the Dublin East Indiaman arrived from England, on board of which ship was a party of the 77th Regiment, under the command of Colonel Balfour. The result of my lunar observations gave for the longitude of Simon's Bay 18 degrees 48 minutes 34 seconds east, the latitude 34 degrees 11 minutes 34 seconds south. The timekeeper likewise made the longitude 18 degrees 47 minutes east. The longitude as established by former observations is 18 degrees 33 minutes east. The variation of the compass on shore was 24 degrees 4 minutes west, but on board of the ship it was only 22 degrees 28 minutes west. The time of high water was 2:45 on the full and change, and it then flowed 6 feet. With respect to the Cape Promontory, it lies about 3 miles east of the meridian of Simonstown. All the tables of latitude and longitude placed the Cape in 34 degrees 29 minutes south latitude, but from many observations off it with good instruments, I make it to lie in 34 degrees 23 minutes south, which agrees with its situation as laid down in Major Reynolds' map. The part which I call the Cape is the southernmost point of the land between Table Bay and False Bay, but the Dutch consider the westernmost part of the coast to be the Cape. Sunday the 29th. On the 29th, being ready for sea, I took the timekeeper and instruments on board. The error of the timekeeper was 3 minutes 33 seconds, too slow for the mean time at Greenwich, and its rate of going 3 seconds per day losing. The thermometer during our stay here was from 51 to 66 degrees. July, Tuesday the 1st. We had been 38 days at this place, and my people had received all the advantage that could be derived from the refreshments of every kind that are here to be met with. We sailed at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and saluted the platform with 13 guns as we ran out of the bay, which were returned. And as we leave the Cape of Good Hope and head into the Indian Ocean and then the Pacific, I think we'll end this evening's reading from A Voyage to the South Sea by Lieutenant William Bligh, a record of a voyage we now consider infamous, but so far has been pretty boring. If you'd like to read this work for yourself, as always you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.